All right, welcome back to the Business Roundtable Podcast. I am your host, David Carr of Steward Your Business, bringing teams together to accomplish great things. We have another great new guest here on the podcast, Robert Locke. I'm excited to have him on here. We have met through one of our networking groups, Success Champions Network. You might have heard other guests in the past here. Robert is coming us from Colorado, right, Robert?
Correct.
Yeah.
Yes.
All the way from Colorado here. Robert is the founder and president of Buffalo Mountain Sales Strategy. We're going to talk all about sales today. You haven't heard us talk too much about that in the past. Quite honestly, that's not where my expertise lies, although I've learned along the way and had coaches and other folks infuse and help me along the way, like Robert. So, Robert, we're going to welcome to the podcast. Glad to have you here. I know this is a fun platform. We're going to really enjoy you sharing your experience in the sales space today.
Yeah, thank you. Excited to be here.
Absolutely. Now, Robert, you have helped business owners, leaders build scalable, resilient sales operations, and which contributes to valuation and then this long-term strategic growth. And you have a vast background. So I want to take people back a little bit, give you an opportunity to kind of learn a little bit more about you, Robert. What got you into sales and where you're at? Why did you found Buffalo Mountain Sales Strategy? And just walk us back for a few minutes about your journey in this space.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I was thinking there's an old scene in Airplane where the guy starts off with, well, first the earth cooled. So we're not going to go back that far.
Yeah, that
far. But it does feel like, the career now goes back a number of decades. So, and it's been a lot of fun. I started out as a sales representative, primarily was how I got into sales.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't my intended course, but it was the one that made the most sense when I was trying to figure out what it was I wanted to do, and grew through that from, regular, business development roles to leadership roles, ultimately through to the VP of sales role and national sales manager, for larger companies. And most of the companies that I worked with have been in manufacturing, industrial, and distribution spaces, companies that are making parts, smelting things, forming metal, feeding people, so I'm very comfortable in the physical world. So I spent a lot of time, both actually in sales and operations in those companies. So I've always felt that I've had a unique experience in that I've seen both and led in both the front of the house and the back of the house, to use the restaurant analogy. I understand the challenges that a sales force has when they feel disconnected from the manufacturing operation or from the operation in general. But I've also seen how frustrated the operation can get with a sales team that is not doing what they believe it should be. And that's those are both pretty common. Like I said, not that many of us have seen both sides of that, or actually led both sides of that. So it's been an interesting learnings. And coming out of COVID, I don't know about you, but so many, like, COVID is now a breaking point in almost everybody's story, right?
5 years ago now. Hard to believe.
Exactly. I know, incredible, really is. But coming out of COVID, I was with a national manufacturer, 5 locations throughout the country, and I was the VP of sales in that organization, and I was approached by the ownership to take on this supply chain position. Basically, the company had no centralized structure for supply chain whatsoever. So all our plants were all alone, and we didn't have time to bring someone in, train them up. They wanted someone to build relationships with those suppliers. And it was incredible. It was old school horse trading, just, banter for things. And I'll give you this if you give me that. It was a whole lot of fun. And then that sort of turned into steady state. And I found that I wanted to get back into commercial, back to the sales, back to leading sales teams and growing revenue again. And so I decided to start my company. It's something I've been, that's Morpheus would call a splinter in his mind for years and years and years. And I, a lot of things worked out personally, professionally. I thought this is the time. So I jumped in and aligned myself with Sales Acceleration, which is a national company of advisors, all focused in the outsourced or fractional sales leadership roles. And it really set well with my personal beliefs and my ethics and things like that. And I said, you know what, if I'm ever going to start my business, this is going to give me a chance the best chance to do it. I've got a little bit of best of both worlds. I've got their products, their marketing, their presence, but I've got the flexibility to do this the way that I want. And so
I love that. Yeah.
Within that, my mission is to because I came out of manufacturing, I sort of gravitated right back to that. I said, I want to fix your broken sales machine. That's what I want to do. Now, sometimes we build and design sales machines, but for the most part, there's some process that isn't there or isn't working. And so I tend to do that with privately held companies, often family-owned companies. And so it's been a very interesting journey, and I've never been happier career-wise. It's been a lot of fun. So.
Yeah, no, it's been great meeting you, Robert. And I mentioned earlier, Success Championing Network, which has been a great place for other folks like us in this space to find collaboration, and ways that, like I said earlier, having you on the podcast is I don't do the sales development and training, and I work on the other side of people and culture, but this is so important what you're doing. I'd love to get your snapshot today of like, what do you see as kind of the state of sales? Things have changed, technology, like you mentioned earlier, especially if you're talking, there's these big companies like Amazon, Walmart, big companies, and there's these smaller companies, and how we're all, getting involved in there. What are the problems or what are the common things you're seeing right now in sales operations?
Great question. I think in my business, I'm not dealing with the Amazons or the giants, right? So for me, I tend to be kind of lower mid-market companies. But what I see is there's almost too much information. There's almost too much stuff that's being peppered to these owners, and they don't always know where to go. And so from a organizational standpoint, they struggle in certain. I look at it as four main categories. Is where organizations struggle: sales strategy, sales analysis, sales methodology, and sales team. And so when I work with a client, what I look at is where are the biggest challenges, the biggest gaps here. And I see, in any one of those major buckets, they don't have the proper tools to see, with say analytical tools. They don't know why their business is either going up or down. They haven't had the tools or to investigate or determine that. They don't have a documented process for their sales team and sales representatives to follow. So you get that disconnect between here's what the owner of the company thinks sales should be doing. Is that the same thing that the sales rep on the ground in Cincinnati thinks they should be doing?
Right.
I don't know. You don't know because nobody asked, and no one thought to ask because we're all busy running around trying to run our business. So so much of the work that I do with an organization is trying to make sure that each of these main groups are aligned with the organizational value and philosophy. Where do you want to go? What does leadership want? What does operations want? What does marketing want? And what does the sales group want? And make sure that all those are aligned so that we're literally pulling in the same direction as opposed to guessing and maybe fighting it out in the market.
Well, I mean, you bring up a lot of good points, I think, Robert, because I think those lines get blurred, like you're saying, and it isn't clear. I remember one year, and this is in the professional services, Robert, I said, well, here, what's your sales goal for next year? I'm like, well, what's the basis for my sales goal? What are the clients? What are the market sectors? Who, and it was just kind of come up with a number. And I'm like, well, I don't even know. I can give you some information, but how, like you said, how does that all align? It wasn't clear to me. Like, where do I fit within the whole pie, if you will?
Right. And, speaking of that, it's the Sales Acceleration puts out this really great product. You mentioned State of Sales earlier. It's how they every year they put out a document about those different categories where companies are struggling, and the percentage of companies that don't have things like the most basic are, if you added up all of your territory sales reps goals for the year, does that add up to the company goal?
Right.
And like 85% of the time it doesn't.
So you're like, I don't think we're going to achieve it.
Right.
Or I see people selling. I mean, again, I'm coming from a professional services background myself, Robert, but I see people quote unquote selling things, but then they're not doing the analysis of like, how profitable was this that you sold? Yes, you sold a lot, but at the end of the day, maybe we lost money on what we were selling.
Right. It's It's interesting because so often, and then people are saying somewhere in the organization, someone is saying, probably finance, why are we going after this business? What are we doing? And the sales guys are saying, man, we're crushing it. This is awesome. Meanwhile, the company's, working twice as hard for half the profit. Whereas if someone just sat down and did a real detailed analysis of what is our best business, where do we really fit in this market, where can we differentiate ourselves? One of the nice things about growing up in a manufacturing and distribution business is one of my first sales managers in that business told distribution said, people can buy what we do pretty much from anybody. And this was even before like Amazon was a huge thing. Amazon was a thing, but I'm not that old. But it was before you get anything on Amazon, right? So what you had to do was you had to really dig in and figure out, well, what is my value to these clients? Well, who are my good customers and why? So we spent a lot of time on that. How do I differentiate myself in a market where if it's just price, you're going to lose. You'll lose every time eventually because someone will take it, right? So how do you find value, build value with those clients? And so often it's a simple thing like interview your best client. Interview your best customers. Why do you buy from us? Why do you, why have you been buying us for 10 or 15 or 20 years, so, and then start to move towards that and say, all right, well, this is really clearly where we fit because our 80% of our business is in this category. Yet we have the sales team chasing the fancy, sexier 20% because there's bigger dollars there. But is it good for us?
Right. Yeah, no, it's so important to have somebody like you, Robert, that comes in outside of the organization to kind of, like you said, lift up under the hood, so to speak, see what's working and what's not working. And that's why I love having folks like you on the podcast, because hopefully as folks are listening, they're not like, oh man, I haven't considered this. And here's a resource. And by the way, everybody that's listening to the podcast or watching this, we're going to make sure Robert's contact information is all in our show notes. So don't worry, we'll make sure you connect with Robert. He and I are on LinkedIn as well. But this is so important what you're identifying, Robert, these different gaps in the sales cycle, where this is, and unlocking that, which can be huge. It can be huge from profitability, from attracting and retaining clients. You have really transitioned companies from being low profit to to these high value, more scalable operations. And I've seen this too, Robert, in the people side. I literally just had a client where they're like, we have a disconnect between our field people and our office people, and we can't scale. We're kind of stuck. There's not a better collaboration of like, how do we expand this? It's like, well, we've hit our we're not talking with each other, and it's like we have to figure out how to link those together. So can you talk a little bit more about how you restructure for scalability? How do we move the company in the right direction so that it's, not getting stuck in these bottlenecks, if you will, and these gaps?
Sure. Yeah. Well, and certainly, sometimes it is the team, right? And do you have the right people, right seats, pulling in the right direction? And so from a team standpoint, certainly looking at your business as a huge value to, clients that have those challenges, right? Sometimes I start probably the simplest way for me to answer your question is, when I engage with any client or customer on a new product, the first thing we do, or a new engagement, the first thing we do is a really extended deep dive into their existing process or complete lack thereof. And so that leads to, a good deal of work in terms of understanding, interviewing, talking to the different members of the organization. If there is a sales leader, working with that person for a little bit to understand, what have you done? Why have you done it? How's your turnover on the sales team? Often that's a huge indicator. And I'm sure you know this from your work with teams. Turnover is eventually I have a saying, if all your roommate stories are about the bad roommate, you're probably the bad roommate, right? So So to me, it's sort of, are you the problem? Is this the problem? And sometimes it's not that they're the problem in that they're an evil organization. It's that they hire this, hey, this salesperson is experienced. They have industry experience. Well, they had industry experience from another organization that maybe was a lot bigger. Maybe it was $1 billion company that had structure, process in place already, and they thrived in that environment. I like to say salespeople are entrepreneurial, but they tend not to be entrepreneurs. So and I lived this for many, many years. And so we start with, let's understand what you've done, and then what's missing. Then we can fill in the gaps and start to build that true foundation. And that foundation becomes what is scalable. And the pieces of that are things like documented sales process, a fully functional, utilized CRM system.
Yeah.
Right. And I do stress utilize, because everybody tells me they have a CRM.
Yeah, I got that. Are you actually using it? Well, no.
Does anybody use it? Yeah.
Right.
But then also things like, what is your unique selling proposition in the market? That goes back to value. Where is your value? Who are your ideal clients? And have you examined that? And do you really know that? And so then we start to really put a system together, the foundation and framework together for that organization, and then to start grow from that. And so, in an organization that maybe hasn't hired a salesperson or sales leader, or maybe they had, and then something changed, and then maybe it just went back to that owner who took it on. How do we make sure that when we bring someone in, that person understands what's in that owner's head about how to sell what your company does? And oftentimes that's playbook, training, onboarding, right? And all those things then become assets that your company has to bring in a salesperson. We do a lot of work with, where do you sell? Some companies are regional, some companies are national, some companies are international. You need a different structure for each. But again, you're building off of that. And then that way, when you hire that rep in the next region, they've already got the basis of the company background, the training, the onboarding, the playbook. How do we do all these things? Here's how we sell in our organization. It eliminates that frustration of, bringing a rep into world headquarters for 3 days saying, hey, this is how we do it. Good luck. We expect you to do it yourself now. So that becomes your scalable process. Then people ask me all the time, what CRM should I use? To me, I do have a couple favorites, but to me, it doesn't actually matter as long as it's customizable for your process and it's scalable as you grow without huge cost, right? Yes. Some organizations, they want the massive, the big boys, the Salesforce and things like that. And if you're that organization and you need that, perfect. My clients these days they need a little more nimbleness, a little more flexibility. So
I hear you on that.
So for me, I go with like a Pipedrive or a HubSpot or those kinds of CRM. So.
Well, I want to hit on a couple things you brought up. I mean, yes, I'm with you. I mean, really, I've become more agnostic as to the systems. I used to be the user group leader for enterprise resource planning software called Deltek Vision, or there's Vantage Point. They have other ones in there, but what to your point, Robert, it's really the ones that you use actively and get folks involved with. And I see sometimes organizations, like you said, maybe want to buy quote unquote this thing, but not getting to the root of what you just talked about earlier. It's like, okay, have a CRM, absolutely have that, but if you're not clear on your valuation, who your ideal clients are, there's some fundamentals that you mentioned that I feel like are really important that can get off, and things, they were this, and now things and things have changed. So maybe they are, but maybe they aren't. Having somebody like you come back in, Robert, and checking, because one thing I've heard from business owners or presidents of companies is they've got their sales team up and running, and then they don't go back and check on them, or there's not like a checkup. And so what happens is now you're like kind of set it and forget it. And like, wait a minute, hold on. And then you go back and I look and like, they're not following the sales script. They're not following the process that we identified about how to identify the client, to do discovery. There's a whole bunch of missing steps there. So talk a little bit about that, Robert. And
and you're absolutely right. So I think just the first 5 months and 19 days of 2025 can kind of show how quickly things can change. And so, what you thought might have been an outlook for a year that's going to go one way, still some uncertainty there for sure, but people are hesitant, but things change quickly. And so if you just, you mentioned the set it and forget it. If that's what you do, your business is going to change. Your customers are going to change. Their business is going to change. And so staying in touch with those key customers, and really helping, your organization understand. To me, that's a key role of a salesperson we need you out there giving us some leading indicators of what's going on with their business so that we can plan.
Yeah.
And so that's part of it. But that's certainly within a properly functioning organization, right? You're going to, reps are going out, getting that, doing proactive activities to stay in front of clients and customers instead of simply reacting to problems. Beyond that, to me, the excuse me, sorry. I've got a tickle in my throat.
Go ahead. While you're doing that, Robert, take a drink real quick. Cause one of the things we talked about before we started recording this was, this idea of your sales strategy assessment. Like the reason I'm asking this is because I want to go a little bit deeper, or like, how are you addressing your agility, how to adjust? So we're recording this right now in the middle of May 2025. Anybody that's been following along, we have a new president. He's had a lot of different initiatives with tariffs and other things, and things are like changing. And so, you cannot set it and forget it. You could absolutely lose your shirt on one end, or not be prepared to bring things to market. There's a whole host of things there, right, Robert? So talk a little, right. I love when you explained a little bit about this sales agility assessment and this, how you build this framework. It was just, to me, really intriguing and to know. And that's why I wanted to get it, because I see the set it and forget it model. I see these things were just kind of forgot about, and they're not gone back and assessed and checked.
Right. No, and that's and I appreciate that.
Yeah.
Appreciate you refocusing me.
Yeah.
The sales agility assessment, it's a sales acceleration product. There's sort of two levels. One's kind of an intro level, just a quick little, here's 10 questions to kind of help us understand what it is that you're dealing with. And when I start any engagement, there's a much more involved one. It's 60 or 80 questions, and it kind of goes through all of the steps of what do you have, what don't you have, so that we can establish that baseline. And what that baseline shows is where the gaps are. I'm looking for gaps between, communication and process and things like that. So
absolutely.
And then that helps us set the immediate needs for the process, the immediate issues that we're going to tackle together. And then from there, we go out, we do the work we are going to do, and we work as a team to get there. 6 months later, a year later, as soon as we're sort of finished with the first phase, everybody takes that again. And that helps us understand, one, did the work we do, was it effective? Did we move the needle? And then secondly, where is there still work to do? Where are there corners of the organization that maybe finance doesn't agree with my analysis that the sales team is functioning perfectly, right? So we have that CFO or someone in the finance seat would take that assessment. And then the other thing that I do as part of any engagement is there are different types. Sometimes it's more of an in the seat, as the VP of sales or sales leader, where I'm working directly with that team. But other times, and sometimes at the end of a traditional engagement, I then become more a facilitator, where we're going to get together and we're going to meet quarterly or bi-monthly, and we're going to talk about what is the team doing, what's changed in the business, what's changed in our direction that we set out to do a year ago that might be different now. And so part of my role as that advisor to those companies and as that outsourced sales leader is to say, change when you have to, if everything's working, everything's going great, and we did it right, and it's evergreen, amazing. I don't know that any company's business is, at least not in the sizes and scope that I work with, is ever evergreen, right? But at the same time, it's like, all right, where do the tweaks need? How are the reps working out? Are they getting what they need? Has turnover improved? Have we done an analysis there? It takes time to bring in a salesperson and have them be productive. There's not a lot of ways to really short circuit that to zero. Obviously, you want to be as effective as possible. So you need a little bit of time. You need some reps. You need to go out with the messaging. Marketing's aligned with your message now, right? So is that bringing in the right leads? Are we getting enough warm leads? Things like that. So, and those things all need to be evaluated on an ongoing basis.
Yeah, no, I think it's so important. Again, having somebody like you, Robert, that's looking at the bigger picture, you're working with multiple firms. It's not just because what I see sometimes is firms get isolated, insulated, I guess what was the word I want to say. But like if you're not having somebody else coming in and opening up the door and looking at these things, even if you're looking at it, it's like just tweaking, right, and looking and saying, hey, is this still make sense? This goal, or the current challenges? Is there some things that we could tweak and have better results? And I think that's the value of having you, Robert, for example, and why, again, why I have this Business Roundtable podcast is other leaders, whether you're the business owner or you're just, a sales leader or wherever you are in the organization, of like, hey, I know a resource I can help us be better, stronger, prepared, identifying key weaknesses and growth opportunities. I mean, because that's the thing too. I mean, like you said, you may have certain things, and I think, Robert, where you're saying, okay, where are there new areas in the market, new clients, things that are emerging that you didn't consider before? And if you're just kind of going down this path and you're kind of blind, you're not considering this, you bringing this, and I think the value of you working with so many different companies and evaluating things and research, you bring that to the companies that maybe they just don't have that perspective. They don't have that time, the energy, right? That's somebody else just doing all this. This is where you can come in and help them.
Right. Exactly. And so often the owner that I'm working with doesn't have the time or the energy or the background or the experience to deal with these things. They started their business for something else, some other reason. And that wasn't, I want to build a sales team. I started my business to build sales teams. Yep. There's only 200 of us in the sales acceleration category, so you can kind of get a sense of how many people are running to do that. But so a lot of what I try to do with these owners is say, and this kind of goes to our earlier discussion about valuation, is what if I gave you a process that would allow you to work where you want to in your business or on your business, or maybe you don't want to work in your business anymore because you're looking at a retirement plan in the next 5 years or 10 years, or maybe you're looking to sell. And so what I love about what I do and what I love about what I get to do for the owners I work with is I get to put in a system that helps them do what they want, do more of what they want. I can't promise everything of all you want forever, but
right.
They get to offload that to someone with the training and the experience and the background in that area. They get to build revenue along the way, which isn't a bad thing for the most part. And then they get a process and a system that they get to sell when they or turn over to the next generation or ESOP or whatever it is that adds value to that business. For again, in a sale, it adds EBITDA. In a family transition, maybe it just gives the second generation the ability to focus on other things to expand.
Yeah, no, that's so important. I mean, taking and getting folks in alignment with the overall business, the business owner. I think what I hear you saying, Robert, is this is maybe not your strength. You created the business, perhaps, or you're helping them get that team in alignment, with their roles, and just again, just to reiterate, as I'm listening, Robert, like, how have you been able to build that accountability and help build that predictable revenue in those high performing teams? What have you been doing and to help that sales team succeed?
Sure. So the first thing I do with that sales team is I give them a target. We get a target. And that target is not something that I, the sales leader, determine on my own. That is something that as a team, we're going to say, what are we trying to be 3 years from now, 5 years from now, 12 months from now, right? And try to get those layers, those critical layers, and that becomes then you got a goal. And my experience with salespeople is you give them a goal, they're gonna work at it or work towards it, and a lot of times they're gonna make it. Sometimes they won't, but usually it isn't for lack of trying. So that's sort of the first thing we do. Where do you want to be? How do we break this down then into usable chunks, right? Because it's nice to say we want to grow $5 million in 3 years. That's nice. It's great.
Yes.
Great goal. How do we break that then into usable chunks? And then that becomes more like, and I learned this actually from some EOS friends in the book Traction, is then you start to look at what are the things we're going to do in the next 4 quarters. That are going to help. So you sort of bring that long-term goal, bring it into maybe a 12-month goal, and then say these are the things we need to do in the next 90 days, right? It makes a lot of sense because you start to talk about, and I've seen this in other organizations, is put up the big goal. Everybody's all excited at the end of the annual meeting. And then what? I don't know.
Yep.
They forget it all. Like, and then because they go back to doing their daily lives. So that's the first thing. And then then the next thing are systems and processes to make sure that we're getting there. And so that's a system of accountability and actionability that says, how do we, what are our reps doing? Who are they calling on? Where do they need to go? Are they in the right places? And then sort of circle that. That becomes a feedback loop of, we tried it. We tried it over this period of time. Here's where we were. Did it work? Yes, no, maybe. And then, lather, rinse, and repeat that so that you're constantly learning. I think sometimes people just think they can just keep doing the same thing over and over and not have it work out the same way it did last time. And this is where, to me, this is where accountability comes in. And so often, in an organization where it's maybe either owner led, where the owner is so distracted, the sales team is on its own, or sometimes even a sales leader that is struggling. How do we make sure that each level has what they need to manage their team and their organization, has the tools that they need to develop the accountability required for, moving the needle, moving forward, doing the actions we need to do every day, every week, every month, so that we hit our goal in 3 to 5 years.
Well, it's so important, like you said, and every company is a little different. You're identifying them. You mentioned Traction. Another book I like is called The 12-Week Year. But same thing, idea is like we're looking at the tactics and seeing if they're working or not working. How do they need to be adjusted? And I think having somebody like you, Robert, where you're coming in again hopefully I feel like in a non-threatening way, like you're coming in and it's like, I want to help everybody succeed. So there's no agenda other than helping you succeed. There's no territorial, there's no, I think sometimes people get like, oh, there's a power struggle here, or how we're going to do this, right? We all want to strengthen everybody in the organization, as I do the people on the organizational culture side. But you're right, I hear you developing this strong interdependent team. How do we leverage each other's strengths and overall, the resources within the company.
Yeah. And I think, sometimes I get asked the questions like, well, how can, if you're not here full time, the challenge, that maybe a half a step back, the challenge that I saw, and kind of the reason why there's this outsourced model, is that there are these companies that have the need, but they're not yet big enough to know what to do about it, or to be able to hire it full time.
Yep.
Sorry. And so for me, people ask me, well, how can you be effective in only hours a week? Well, the answer is because that's all I do. In other organizations where I was the sales lead, I was also in and out of factory meetings and in and out of, maintenance meetings and things like that. Why was I there? Leader in the company, made sense at the time. I'm trying to help the sales group understand better all these other things that are going on.
Yep.
Well, all I do now is focus on getting that sales team where it needs to be, getting that sales team aligned with the organization. And then I do that in 2 or 3 other places. So you don't get tied up in all of the minutia of the business. And like you said too, I don't have an agenda walking in the door except to help you grow.
Yeah. It's like you're not absolutely. I know we're getting close to the end of the podcast here, Robert, and I appreciate you sharing here, because there's so much people can learn and listen to. Go back to the sales agility assessment, what he's a part of with the sales acceleration. Robert, we're just cracking open the door, if you will.
We didn't even get to tech.
I know we have to have you come back, because we're not talking about AI and other things. There's so much more, and honestly, we're going to look at things and look where the economy is going and other changes and dynamics. So I think I'd love to have you back on for another segment here. You're I think hopefully opening the possibility, people seeing like, hey, it doesn't have to just be in our in-house. We don't have to have all the answers. There's somebody like you, Robert, that's a resource out there. So as we're wrapping up the episode, just what's a key takeaway or thought that you want the business owner or the sales leader, sales manager, whatever the case might be, would you say, hey, if nothing else, just take this and think about this, and until our next episode when we have you back on,
Right,
Robert.
right.
Yeah.
I think there's a few different ways that I can answer that. I think the simplest way is probably, I believe, having done the work that I've been doing now as an independent, and the work that I do with organizations like the Exit Ready Institute, I believe that every company, regardless of what your long-term plan is, should be ready to exit at all. That is generally a well-run, well-structured organization based off process and systems that someone's going to buy. Now, again, whether or not you're going to turn it over to your kids, whether or not you're going to turn it into an ESOP, doesn't matter. Still, so to me, that exit ready term is a strong one, a powerful one for any owner.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, I think building a great sales operation isn't just about the numbers, like you said. It's really creating a system that you can grow with. That's honestly what real leadership looks like in sales. Robert, we're grateful to have you here. And, Robert, I love collaborating and hearing from you. Your comments, certainly please share them with us. We would love to have them. I'll make sure that Robert gets them. We will live all your contact information, Robert, so you can look up Buffalo Mountain Sales Strategies. That's I don't think there's any other one that I know of like that name, Robert.
No,
you're the only one.
I am. They broke the mold.
So there you go. Yeah.
Thank you for having me, and I really appreciate the work that you're doing with leadership and organizations as well.
Thank you, Robert, for joining us. Everybody, of course, like, subscribe. We love having you share this if it found value to you. Share with your sales team if you're hearing this, and to come back again to our next episode of the Business Roundtable Podcast. Thanks again, everybody, for being a part of with us today. Until next time, take care, everybody.